Right now we're in a transition time from winter to spring. It's definitely going to freeze again. It's going to start warming up in nice ways. And a lot of the work that I did this winter was pruning and woodland management. I'd like to make a case for the idea of leaving branches all winter. So from basically January, February, when I started doing all of this pruning work, just left them as I went. And this somehow is a permaculture thing to do. It's not that I'm being lazy or sloppy. I think it's actually permaculture. Let me try to explain. I bring in the term permaculture because that's something I would like to believe we actively farm within the framework of, the ethics of, and the principles of. And the idea of, oh, well, just whatever you do, cut stuff and throw it wherever, leave it forever, who cares, whatever, it's permaculture, isn't true. I'm not trying to say that. But the idea of late winter, early spring, to not be super tidy about what you're up to is actually very helpful. Let's zoom in a little. In front of me is this really beautiful blue-purple box elder, which is a really compelling maple family plant. These two major branches I cut just a few weeks ago from this stem here. So this is a pollarding cut to take this box elder and bring it back to a manageable dense fist or a knuckle of growth. So it'll resprout from here, pumping carbon through the soil and nutrients, and also releasing more light to Causa dogwood and pawpaw and serviceberry in here. But there's a lot of branches, and you can see that what's happening, this is a tree that is not particularly a great example. I'm going to kind of move up over time through these examples. But you can see here the tips of these, this is all deer browse. And so at the end of winter, the deer are quite hungry. In fact, I just recently spoke about how they'll go through and eat the tips of our black currants when they're particularly hungry. But if I can provide them browse, so basically every single terminal tip of all of this is food for deer at a height that they can access along a pathway that they're already going, they can meet their needs without having to dip a little bit deeper into our plantings. And my policy for years now, in fact, I made a video way back when, I'll try to find it, talking about putting down material for rabbits to eat, which we'll look at in a moment. And I still stand by that. I think it's actually a legitimate management strategy of late winter prunings, leaving debris around, or better yet, dragging them over areas where you want to add fertility for next season. So maybe you're going to break ground on a new bed or plant potatoes or something like that. You can put all your branches over that area for the rabbits and the deer to focus their attention on that woody material that is waste material anyway. And then that can either become biochar or be woven into a dead hedge, or be broken down and laid in a ditch and have soil cover over it, so that can be hugel mound material. Lots of pathways a little later, but a really nice high yield in the meantime. In front of me here is a Hall's Hardy almond, which is a type of peach plant. Very, very fast growing, tall growing plant. You can see this one branch here. I did some cuts recently with a pole saw. I'll cut this later on when things warm up so that we can use it, Juan can use it for making spoons and other interesting things. But it was on its way to getting into the power line, so it needed the process of bringing the canopy back down a little bit. And here's a neat example of a few things happening. If we zoom in on this, we can see that right along the ground line where it's accessible to rabbits, all the areas where it's kind of orange and white, that is where rabbits went through and took the bark off. And so their needs are being met by easy to harvest material of younger wood. That's it, them in there, them right there. And the deer are chewing on the tips. I'll look for that in a moment. But all of the manure that the rabbits are putting down in this area, once we get the branches off of here, so we'll let this dry a little longer, probably process a little bit of this into firewood. It's good quality firewood, and spoon wood and things like that. Bring this material over to the fence, and then we can take a good stiff rake and rake all of that fertility, clean up the last bits of debris right as the season begins. Right around the edge of this, so here is our Hall's Hardy almond again. We have cultivar blackberries, there's profusion sorrel, there's perennial potatoes, there are gooseberries, there's a hazelnut a little further back. And so by letting the creatures eat here, they're distracted, they're enjoying themselves here, their fertility is deposited, and I can easily rake it right over the nutrient needing elements of oregano and sorrel and things, and let that melt right in and feed this polyculture. Same idea, this is where the deer are enjoying their part, so the rabbits are eating down below. In fact, I could go through with pruners if I wanted to prioritize feeding rabbits over deer. I'm comfortable with both of them eating luscious meals out of here. They're getting to eat the fresh tips of winter pruned, organically grown almond. Why not? And you can see the deposits here are pretty solid. So there's a big pile of deer manure, deer manure, deer manure, deer manure. The lighter gray or the lighter brown is all rabbit manure. It goes on and on. If you kind of get your eyes dialed in, if you get poop vision enabled, you get to see that it's all throughout. Basically every square foot, more or less, there's some manure, and it's over a mowing area. So either I can just leave it and it'll fertilize the grass, which we then harvest with the mower later on, or I can simply rake it up against the black currants, up against the other herbaceous plants that are in here. It looks like the honey locust that I cut here is providing some nitrogen-rich browse for rabbits, and they're enjoying that, and later on that can be woven into the fence line or turned into charcoal. Part of this whole idea is trying to remind folks, remind myself actively and remind folks outwardly that the idea of time scale is pretty critical with all of this work. This is part of why I love to plant trees. I like the idea of things happening later on, actions now begetting positive benefits later on, some yields in the meantime and richer, fuller yields later on. But by cutting the material, I can move through in an effective way and just get the pruning done, you know, while there's snow on the ground, while it's bitter cold. Know that even though it seems on the surface that I'm being, you know, quote unquote lazy or sloppy or leaving a mess, whatever you want to call it, it is doing ecosystem service. It's creating a distraction for the deer and the rabbits that otherwise during that time explicitly seek out the plant material I care about. So if I'm not providing them food, then they're going after the things I care about unless it's all fenced off. And that's one area where I am lazy. I don't fence stuff, so I need to provide them stuff during that very cold moment. You can see here where I headed back, this is an apple tree that was starting to succumb to black rot, or fire blight I should say, and cut at a certain point here. Basically from there on, the fire blight was starting to really settle in. You can see this is the main stem here, and so there's huge amounts of food for the wildlife within the apple in particular. So here's a branch with deer manure all throughout, all around. Every single tip, more or less, that was alive is nibbled on. So I don't know how you would calculate it, but by the end of this season, there'll be about as much deer manure and rabbit manure on the surface area as leaves in these areas where this plant material was deposited. And all I have to do is passively cut and leave it at the right time of year to offer it up to them. This is still a little too high to be rabbit affirming, but right now I'm trying to focus on keeping the deer distracted. So I'm going to keep it lofty so the apple wood is easiest for the deer. And then once they've gotten the tips, which is their primary thing that they enjoy, I can chop it up a little bit more and lay it down on something like this, which is a lump of topsoil that we are ready to start thinking about planting into some guilds. So I can cover this with fine branch material for another month or two and have it be like a buffet area for the rabbits to really hit hard, and just cover this whole thing with manure. And once they're done and we have some time and the soil dries out, we can drag the material over and weave it into our brush wall. I don't think I'll have the bandwidth to turn it into charcoal. That's probably the highest yield, but weaving it into a contiguous brush wall around the property makes wildlife habitat for rabbits and for birds, and deflects the deer flow through the landscape a little bit. All throughout this landscape, you can see that pattern playing out from this winter of woody debris laying on the ground for a couple of months, let's say January through March, early April. By then things start to green up. The herbaceous offerings are what the deer and rabbits transition to. But we can consider it an excuse or whatever, but while you're pruning in the winter, think about just leaving everything right where you're doing it. Better yet, putting it over areas where you plan on planting in the future, not where plants are that are high value to you now, but where you know you're going to be developing more nutrient hungry characters later on. This debris translates directly into manures from the wildlife. A lot of pleasure for them, and a lot of ways of kind of integrating your own needs with nature's needs, having less competition and less direct frustration with these creatures, kind of farming along with them. For now, I'll enjoy the immense amount of deposit that's been offered up by these characters that are now using this landscape as a place to comfortably get through the last bits of winter. There's running water through here, there's held water that's being filtered, so they've got good clean drinking water. There is ample windbreak throughout and spots where they can bed down in a comfortable way. To be perfectly honest, we also engage in hunting these creatures. John, if you're watching this, thank you so much. And our friend John hunts deer in this landscape during the winter months using a deer management permit that we have. And he is a phenomenal, extremely skilled hunter and also an amazing butcher. He's down in Newfield, New York. Check him out. I'll put a link in the description. But that's a way to harvest the protein and the fat of this landscape. We harvest a very, very small percentage of the deer that move through here, but that's a huge part of our diet as well. So green tips of woody debris left in the woods during midwinter through the end of winter translates into huge amounts of deposits of fertility from these creatures, to the point where there is equal amounts of coverage of manure to non in some areas, and the cambium and the tips of the stuff that you're cutting anyway turns directly into manure, which could turn into protein and fat for you and your family if needed, or just simply beautifully ecosystem service for the livelihood and the needs of those wild creatures. It can still become carbon in the form of biochar if that's a pathway you're interested in, or windbreak, or laid up in piles around trees to be physically complex enough to keep the deer out of the center. So with enough material, enough debris, you could put something like a chestnut with a whole pile of branches around it. It's kind of intense to work around, but that could be your fencing to establish more trees too. Let's consider this the most extremely long-winded way of saying cut stuff in the winter, leave it because there's other stuff to do, come around later on and clean it up, ... There's little poops everywhere that you can do fun things with, or just leave them. Maybe you like your lawn, put it in spots to make the lawn even greener. The earthworms will appreciate you, the rabbits will appreciate you, the deer will appreciate you, and if you choose to hunt any of those creatures, then the offsetting of getting meat from elsewhere, that's helpful too. So anyway, long story long. Thanks for watching.